Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born.
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
So the question I was asked by absolutely everyone was, you gotta watch the royal wedding? Is that gonna be a thing for you? I bet you're so excited because, you know, you're English and you grew up in England. Well, I'm half English. And I did grow up in England. And I do have an English side to my family. But even when I was living in England, I never quite understood the logic behind the royals. I was like, well, they don't need them anymore, right? And my dad was like, no, they don't need them anymore. That was that whole Oliver Cromwell thing I learned in history class, right? You can't have sort of a ruling class. We're dispensing with that, and we're instead going with a form of democracy. Therefore, no more totalitarian rulers. Right, yeah, you paid attention in class. I'm glad to hear that you understood that. Right, I did. So why do we still have the royals? Well, they're kind of a figurehead. A figurehead of what? Well, for England. But England wasn't too hot on the royals when they were trying to overthrow them, do away with them, when Oliver Cromwell sort of marched in and said, no more of this totalitarian ruler stuff. So why do we keep them around? They weren't like a beloved thing. And my dad was like, I couldn't really tell you. I was like, they're really expensive, right? And he's like, what do you mean they're expensive? And I was like, well, they've got all this money because they just kind of take it for being royal from the rest of the people in England. And yeah, that's true. And also, you know, there's this whole thing of the royals could probably end all the hunger in England, if not all the hunger in the world, if they would just, you know, give up some of the stuff that they had taken from people without having to work for it for a really long time, and all of the above. And a lot of people are still of the opinion that Oliver Cromwell let them off light, and we've been paying for it ever since. In England, anyway. So I don't have this sort of fascination with the royals. I'm more sort of puzzled by them and why England still kind of puts up with the idea of them owning large chunks of the country without really having ostensibly done too much to earn them, other than have collected tax money throughout history. So it's not tremendously entertaining. I'm not enamored of the royals. And like I said, I'm a bit more puzzled by the fact that they're allowed to continue being the royals than anything else. But I will say this, though. Whenever I've seen Meghan and Harry together, I have noticed one thing, and I'm no psychologist, and I don't really know what the hell I'm talking about, and I could be making this up, but if it occurs to me, it probably occurs to the rest of the world that's watching them. Seems like they're sort of down for each other. Seems like Harry treats this person that is in no way, shape, or form in keeping with English traditions with a tremendous amount of respect. You feel like there's a very good chance that he might have had to have fought for that relationship. And as such, he's down for his woman. As such, he treats her with respect. As such, he makes her feel as though he's always got her back. And that's a healthy thing. And that's a good thing. And that is an increasingly rare thing. So inasmuch as Meghan and Harry are kind of sort of setting a bit of an example through their relationship, or at least through what their relationship appears to be, I actually saw a little bit of value in the royal wedding being such a tremendous public spectacle. Like I said, I'm more bemused by the existence of the royals, and no, I'm not about to stay up late to watch the wedding. I'll be snoozing away, or at least trying to snooze away, as I watch reruns of Seinfeld. That was my take going into the weekend, and that was a take I continue to have. Although, I gotta tell you, I am a little sad I missed out on Gayle King's coverage. She had entirely too much coffee before covering it. Did you hear this?
Hello, I'm Gayle King of CBS This Morning. I just have one big goosebump all over my body. I'm going to change hats every hour on the hour. We just saw James Blunt go, and he does that song, You're Beautiful. That's all I'm going to sing of that. I feel like crying. Oh, my gosh. This is actually very good and very moist. You're beautiful. Oh, yes. Do you know that?
Yes, of course I do.
I won't sing anymore. You're beautiful. I love that song. Pippa got a lot of attention because everyone was raving about her bottom, and I thought, is that a big bottom? I don't think so. But she got a lot of attention from her bottom that people thought was perfection. Guess that's a matter of opinion. I've seen some big bottoms. I didn't think that was one, but okay.
So while I might not have been overly excited to have been there had I been there, apparently Gayle King all sorts of hopped up on the experience. There is another element to their wedding which I kind of appreciate, and that's the fact that, shock, horror, Harry's dipping his tadger into someone from the colonies, don't you know? Yeah, he's marrying an American. He's marrying someone from a different country. And he's also marrying someone who is not white. Now, this should not be a big deal. It's 2018. The idea that a white person could marry someone that wasn't white and have it be something that the world would just have to accept, that should have gone out with Abraham Lincoln. That should not be a surprise. That should not be in any way, shape, or form a challenge to people. But in 2018, miraculously, because some factions of the world are so tremendously under-evolved, it is a thing. And I do like the fact that, if nothing else, they're setting a new normal by A, being nice to each other, B, being married to someone who's a different color skin than they are, and having it be, just fine. So, as far as all that goes, yeah, congrats.
Real radio.
104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So if you're like me, you don't necessarily buy into this idea of the lefty media types. The C-SPANs, the MSNBCs, folks like this that rant and rave about Trump or anything that is even vaguely right-wing being the downfall of all civilization. If you're like me, you don't necessarily believe that they really want Trump gone, that they really have that big of a problem with him. If you're like me, you believe they are riding the Trump wave into tons of fun and profit. And in doing so, they're sort of messing with the perception of truth. The American people have a hard time finding truth. And I think you find it very, very difficult to accept anything as truth once you know you've been lied to a couple times. Do you remember your first experience with someone that lied? When I was a kid, I moved from America to England. And I remember kind of having a rough time with it. I had to leave my dog. I had to leave my home. I had to leave my baseball team. I had to leave the idea of trick-or-treating and go to a country where Halloween was still viewed as being vaguely pagan and nobody got free candy. I was unamused at best when I was like 6, 7 years old and we had to do this. No fun. However, my father told me it would be okay because he had a coworker whose kid went to my school and was in my class, and at least I would have a friend and somebody that knew me. And I was like, all right, cool. Well, I'll be on the lookout for her. That'll be okay. And I actually wind up sitting next to this girl in a couple classes. Now, I'm leaving her name out of it because, look, I don't think she listens to the show. But on the off chance that she does, I don't need an 8-year-old from the past coming back and calling me a liar about her being a liar. But the deal was this. I sat next to her and she was fine. She was okay. She was nice enough, I suppose. But I noticed something. I saw some money on the floor one day, and she was like, oh, my money. I was like, oh, I guess it's yours. Okay, cool. I thought I found myself a 10-pence piece, and I could go get myself some candy. But no, it was yours, so that's fine. And then I saw this really cool eraser. I think it was like a Captain America eraser on the ground. I was like, oh, sweet, that's awesome. I wonder whose that is. If nobody claims it, maybe I can have it, but I'm going to give it to the teacher, and maybe it could be mine. And she was like, oh, my eraser. I was like, oh, all right. And then I had one of those, do you remember those outliner markers? Man, they were cool. They were probably filled with lead paint or something highly toxic, and that's probably why we don't see them around too often. But they were these really, really cool paint pens, highly coveted items if you were between the ages of 6 and 8. They would paint in that silver color, and then around the edges of the line you'd drawn, it would be a different color, like a metallic color, like the outline was gold and the pen was silver, or the pen wrote in silver and the outline was gold. Do you remember those? So cool. So cool. And I dropped mine on the floor. Didn't notice it, but I found it when I went back to my seat one day on the floor, and I'm sitting next to this girl. And I'm like, oh, well, here's my marker. And she's like, my marker. And I was like, no, hold on. No, this isn't your marker. This is, no, this is actually my marker. This is my marker that I know I brought from home, and it's definitely mine. This is not yours. And she was like, oh, yeah. And she knew. Up until that point, I'd never had the occasion to bust someone in a lie. But I remember this was probably the first time I caught someone in a lie. And my 7-8-year-old brain, however the hell old I was at the time, started to put a couple of events together. I was like, hold on. She tried to claim my marker, my highly coveted outliner, super awesome marker that every kid loves and every kid wants, that is definitely mine, that I brought from home. She tried to claim it as hers without even thinking about it. Wait a second. What about the Captain America eraser? What about that? What about that money that I found on the floor? What if none of these things were hers? And you know what? Maybe some of them were, maybe some of them weren't. But from there on in, my kid brain linked up the idea that when she was talking about something like that, she was lying. I just found it safe to assume that she was a liar who lied, and therefore not to be trusted. And therefore, the vast majority of the things that came out of her mouth when she was talking to me were not to be believed and not to be taken seriously. And if you're an American in 2018, you might never even have known this. I don't think I knew this. But there was a time where news in this country, allegedly, I'm told, I think it was before we were born, but there was a time in this country where news was fact-based. There was a time in this country where it wasn't necessarily conjecture. There wasn't editorializing. Opinion was not involved in the news. The news was a fact followed by another fact. And that was kind of sort of it. The people that read the news at nighttime when you came home on the television, from what I understand, were among the most trusted people in America. Now, maybe people were right to trust them, maybe they were wrong to trust them. But people had an idea that they could trust news as fact, or at least as close to fact and truth as people could get them. If you're like me, you've grown up in a day and age where someone went, all right, what if we just put news on 24 hours a day? What if we get Buckley and Vidal in a room to fight about politics? What about that? And from there, the slippery slope, well, we as a society slid down it, where the idea of truth became further and further obscured. But I will tell you one thing. Once you find out that someone has lied to you, like this girl lied to me in the 3rd grade about my freaking marker, it becomes awfully, and I do mean awfully hard to trust ever again. And that's the situation we're in right now with the left-wing media types that are trying to take down Trump, and I'm going to tell you why next.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radioland. All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on, come on.
So, you know, as you and I were talking about, truth is a tough commodity to come by in 2018, especially if you're looking for any kind of truth in the news. It's a slippery slope that we started sliding down back in the day of someone going, what if we just had news on 24 hours? Well, then we need an awful lot to fill that. When it stopped being the nightly news, when it stopped being some guy that was incredibly trusted or some woman that was the personification of fact, and started being, we got to fill up 24/7 with news, nothing but news. Well, then they started having to kill a little bit of time. And there was this idea that had been presented up until this point in, I believe, the mid-60s when it first started. The news had been, like I said, fact and truth, or at least based on the idea of fact and truth. There wasn't editorializing. There wasn't conjecture. It wasn't a partisan thing, at least to the best of my knowledge. You and I, we've grown up in a world where it's very common to say, oh, sure, if you're going to believe what they say on that channel. Oh, sure, if you're going to believe what they say on that channel. Sheep, loser, can't think for yourself, ignoramus, you hate America. No, you hate America. That's talking about the news. It's a lot of conjecture, a lot of opinion. And that wasn't always the case. There was a time when I think it was ABC. That was a network. You and I have talked about this on the show a little bit in the past, but it's such a pivotal turning point in our country's history that it bears some inspection. And there's a really cool documentary that got made on it. I think it's called Best of Enemies. You can watch it on Netflix. Please do. It'll explain an awful lot about why the world is the way it is in 2018, at least when it comes to news and how we consume it, which, don't kid yourself, radically affects the shape of the world. But I think it was ABC. They were this failing network. And because they had no ratings to hold on to, they were literally willing to try anything that they could and try and make it stick to a wall and try and make some kind of advertising bucks off of it. So they got people that disagreed with each other and thought, yeah, let's get them on TV and have them argue. And they got Buckley, William F. Buckley, to represent the right-wing folks, and they got Gore Vidal to represent the left. And man, they went at it for a very, very long time. They became best of enemies, like the documentary called them. I think it all ended in shame for Buckley when he kind of discredited himself. He allowed Gore Vidal to get under his skin. I can't remember what it was Gore Vidal said to him, but he threatened him with physical violence on TV and used a gay slur to describe him to his face. Not a good look. And he wound up blowing his cool. And as much as that was, well, an insult to Vidal, having officially made William F. Buckley lose it on television, considered that one of his greatest moments of victory. It's fantastic. And meanwhile, ratings shot the hell up. You have these two guys calling each other idiots. Two unbelievably intelligent, well-spoken, educated individuals just calling each other mouth-breathing, booger-eating morons. And people ate it up with a spoon. So that became the news. That became the cash cow. That became the money spinner. That became the beginning of the end for the truth in news. And there were all these spin-off shows, and other networks were very quick to recognize the fact that, hey, you could make big bucks by getting people with opposing opinions to argue about what the truth was on television. And there it went. There went our grasp of the truth. And it will lead you, if you examine the situation, to understand a little bit better why we are the people we are today. And why the news is something we fight over as opposed to a source of information. So there's that. But in much the same way that the folks over at ABC realized they could pull their network out of the toilet by getting Vidal and Buckley to argue. By the way, William F. Buckley had a magazine called The Statesman, I believe it was called. He had this magazine called The Statesman, this conservative magazine. Sort of the I don't want to call it Breitbart of the day, but it was a very sort of powerful conservative news source. And it was Buckley that kind of picked Reagan to be president, or at least that's the impression he would like to give you, or he would have liked to have given you while he was still alive. And it earned Buckley the reputation of being a kingmaker when he championed Reagan and Reagan got elected. So that's sort of what happened to him. And, well, Vidal went on to write a bunch of books and things of that nature and go be Gore Vidal. Anyways, having effectively destroyed the idea of truth in Western civilization, those guys went on to do what the hell they did. But it leaves us now at a point where there's big money to be made in confusion and lies on both sides of the political sense, with both news outlets with differing opinions. Having fact and truth and getting along, well, that would eat into some clicks. That would eat into some advertising dollars. That would eat into some sensationalism and headlines that, well, it pays for a lot of very rich people to remain very rich. So why would they mess with the truth? And there was a perfect example that happened of that this past weekend just gone by. Now, if you've listened to the show for any length of time, you might have had a hard time pinning me down politically. I get these letters all the time. Are you right? Are you left? What are you? I'm neither. I believe the two-party system is just a way of eliciting a knee-jerk reaction from you and I, a way of removing critical thinking from our political process, a way of getting you to mark yourself down as something so they can count on your vote and you're not going to ask too many difficult questions. I believe in people. I don't believe in party. And most of the people that call themselves politicians, I don't believe in them. The left and the right, they're Coke and Pepsi to me. They're brown, sugary, chemical-filled water that's not that good for you, yet everyone continues drinking it. Why, I can't really figure out. But they do. They just taste vaguely different. But ultimately, in a blind taste test, a lot of people, when pressed, without the markings on the label, would not be able to identify one versus the other. There's a lot of folks that have made big dollars off of being a public servant that sort of forgot the idea is to serve the public. So, yeah, no, I don't buy into the idea of the left and the right. So you might occasionally hear me say something about Trump and go, hold on a second. Sounds like he's okay with what Trump just did or said. What am I listening to? Or you might go, hold on a second, he might have said something that vaguely implied he thought Trump was a ridiculous moron. What the hell am I listening to? And you know what? You'd both be right when you thought these things. But here's the deal. This is a perfect example of the truth being further obscured from us. The media proved why Trump's attacks on them are not necessarily warranted by having this big narrative the other day. Trump talking about illegal immigrants, saying they're not people, they're not animals. Now, you take his words out of context, and they're not pretty. But the truth is, he was talking about MS-13. A massive, violent, unbelievably deadly criminal force. MS-13. When he said, these are not people, these are animals. But here's the thing. Why let context, or the proper context, get in the way of something that people are going to click on? Trump says these people aren't people, they're animals. It all started with C-SPAN. I think this is where it started. With C-SPAN tweeting, President Trump during California Sanctuary Cities Roundtable says, these aren't people, these are animals. Now, the video, like I said, not encumbered by the burden of context that might get you a little closer to the truth. Why bother with that when you can make big bucks off of clicks and Twitter followers and things of that nature? The video didn't give the context in which he was responding to a question about MS-13, a massive and exceedingly deadly and violent criminal force. The media didn't bother getting that context right. The New York Times ran the headline, Trump calls some unauthorized immigrants animals in rant. The Washington Post, they ran a story with a headline, calling immigrants animals, Trump evokes an ugly history of dehumanization. In USA Today, it was, Trump ramps up rhetoric on undocumented immigrants. These aren't people, these are animals. And I'm reading this stuff, I'm like, that does sound bad. Let me dig a little. Oh, wait a second. He was talking about MS-13 gangs. No, not really finding any mention of MS-13 in these headlines. And, well, there you have it. There you go. If people look at news outlets, whether they be right-wing or left-wing, whether they be the Washington Post, whether they be Fox News, this is why people don't buy into them. This is why people look at them and go, well, that sort of gives you an idea of what might have happened, but I'm not buying a whole lot of it, and I don't think the truth is really there, and I'm just going to, to find the truth, that involves a lot of different internet searching, and then you're not sure, and then someone's just going to argue with it, screw it, I'm just going to put my head in the sand and keep myself to myself, which is maybe in the long run not that bad of an idea, but it would be nice to be able to get the truth when you wanted it. This is sort of why I favor foreign news outlets. Like I like the BBC. The accents remind me of home from when I grew up. And the other thing about that is they have their own problems. They've got their own Brexits to worry about. That they've got their own situation, and they're not. Trump's an interesting distraction. They like to get mad about it, and they like to draw comparisons between him and Boris Johnson, and they like to rant and rave a little bit about how Americans are absolute loonies because it makes them feel a little bit better about their own unbelievably twisted situation at the moment. But they don't have a ton of time to get into things the way we do. So if you ever read a foreign news source's account of what's going on in America, like occasionally the BBC's, you will oftentimes get to fact a little bit quicker because, well, they just don't have the time or the interest to mess around with the same manipulation of the truth or the same lack of context that is bringing in big dollars to massive American media corporations, whether they're the Foxes or the MSNBCs or the Washington Post or whatever. They're not partisan because they've got better things to do with their day than get deeply involved in the left and right of American politics. So it's one of the reasons I like to go to foreign press for my facts on America. But yeah, in these headlines where the left went after Trump for saying that immigrants were like animals, without the benefit of the context of letting people know that he was referring to MS-13. MS-13 operate at a rather subhuman level. That whole beheading thing that they're into, the murder and all of the things that they do, it is a lot like sharks. It's a lot like kill or be killed. So comparing them to animals, look, there's probably going to be all sorts of people very mad at me for saying something like this. I know. You're dehumanizing. You're just like Trump. You're no better. Well, when you're a murdering scumbag, you've been reducing yourself to an animalistic level for a long time. So there's that. But in these headlines, no mention of MS-13. Why bother? That gets in the way of the truth. That gets in the way of people going, oh, well, that does sound reasonable. I'm not going to click on the link. And this is the reason why trust in journalism in America is at historic lows, and absolutely should be. And look, we're going after the people on the left who reported Trump's comments without the benefit of context because they're there. But the right's just as guilty of it. And this is why we don't trust the media. This is why I guess shows like this are starting to do kind of well because, well, things aren't simple. Things aren't black or white. There's a lot of gray. And the gray is where we hang out on this show because the gray is where you're most likely to find the truth. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper for the truth. Sometimes you just have to go, how are they making money? Oh, well, that's why it's BS. And there you find the truth. The truth is that Trump was responding to a comment from Fresno County Sheriff Margaret Mims, in which she specifically lamented about what she should do when trying to report MS-13 gang members who are in the country illegally. And Trump said, well, we have people coming in the country or trying to come in. We're stopping them, a lot of them, but we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals. And he was, of course, referring to MS-13 gang members. But why bother letting the truth get in the way of a nifty headline? I don't know. And when they do have a legitimate point about something Trump did that was not true or absolutely was not okay, and there's been plenty of that, people are less likely to believe them because of their previous lies. Just like that chick that tried to steal my freaking marker.
Most every day, you're waiting to get washed away. Radio. Radio. 104.1.
Now, more AD on the radio.
Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you my musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD again. Nobody rock nobody better than me. Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you a musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD again. Nobody rock nobody better than me.
So you and I have been talking about Donald Trump saying that immigrants were like animals, or at least that's the headline that everybody clicked on. Dig a little deeper, you find out that, well, there's a lot of news organizations that felt like context schmontext. We don't need to make it clear in the headline that he was referring to MS-13 gang members. And in case you did not know, MS-13, they're an international criminal group. They started as a street gang. Now they are recognized as an international criminal organization. They're famous for machete attacks. They're famous for, well, U.S. Attorney John Horn talked about a 2015 murder conviction in Georgia. There was this girl. She was walking home one evening with a basketball teammate. Got to be 16 the next day. MS-13 members spotted them and attacked them with a machete and baseball bats, and then sent video of the mutilated bodies to a girlfriend. John Horn said the gratuitous acts of violence of these now convicted gang members were intended to spread fear. And it's funny because there's been some blowback to this, with people going, I thought, no matter what they did, MS-13 gang members are humans too. not like you and me, or at least I hope not like you and me. Jeez. Anyways, this is why the American public has a very hard time taking news organizations seriously. Truth, who needs it? It's a whole bunch of whatever. Why let it get in the way of big clicks and big money? Answer, you don't. You just kind of carry on looking for those things that can be twisted and distorted and count your bucks. That's the way it is. And it's not cool. And it's probably why shows like this, where we don't necessarily subscribe to one side or the other of the political fence, but spend most of our time around here, A, having a yuck at politicians' expense, and B, searching for truth. It's probably why shows like this one are becoming the new normal. I don't know. I do know this, though. People have a very hard time taking news personalities seriously in America. And stuff like this doesn't help. Did you hear the collection of unbelievably lousy English accents that local American news anchors busted out when covering the British royal wedding?
If you enjoy phony British accents, this is the week of the year for you.
Ethan, tell us the details and do it in a British accent for fun.
Hello, Governor.
Hello, Governor.
Hello. Tally ho. No.
Pip, pip.
Cheerio, everyone. Cheerio, everyone. Cheerio this morning. Cheerio.
Cheerio. I've made it to merry old England.
Hello.
You cheeky monkey.
Tally ho.
Maybe a spot of tea.
Spot of tea.
A spot of tea.
A spot of tea.
A spot of tea.
Spot of tea.
From the town of Windsor. Top of the morning.
It's just awful. That said, when I grew up in England, I did notice, and there was really no good reason for this, but I did notice when I was in England, I'm from New York. My family's from the East Coast. They sort of exist from New York up to Massachusetts or Maine. That's where those folks hang out. There's a very specific accent there. And for whatever the hell reason, despite the fact that it had nothing to do with my accent, whenever one of my English buddies would do an impersonation of me, it was Southern. I suppose it's like the vast majority of England being presupposed to be a bunch of cockneys that go, hello, governor, an awful lot. But like the vast majority of English people assumed that I had a Southern accent when I was just, I'm from New York. Why, where are you getting this from? Do you have ears? Are they broken? I don't know. People like to oversimplify that which they do not understand. I will tell you one thing about England, though. Man, this is a country about the size of New York State. I'll never forget when I was in a band and we were touring in England where we started out. Touring was a breeze there. We never drove more than like an hour, maybe two, between shows. And each town was its own little market. It was incredible. Here, there's bands that'll only play 3 or 4 shows on the entirety of the West Coast because they got to spread things out. People are willing to travel. People are used to driving long distances. America's big. You're resigned to spending a significant portion of your life in your car. So you're willing to go places in order to do stuff. But in England, if something's more than an hour away, that band will be coming here the next day. We don't have to worry about it. And it was true. We felt all unbelievably badass in England when one night we drove from Glasgow back to London for a show. We toured all the way up England, the coast of England, and then got into Scotland, played a show in Glasgow, and had to be in London the next day for a gig. So we drove all the way from Glasgow to London, thinking we were just hardened road warriors, unlike anything the world had ever seen before. And ultimately, it was like a 7-hour drive, 8 maybe, depending on traffic. England's small. Like I said, it's about the size of New York State. But what's absolutely incredible about England is the number of different accents in it. It's mind-boggling. Like in New York, something the size of New York State, there's folks with sort of like a New York City type of accent. And then you move up north a little bit and people have kind of an upstate New Yorker type of vibe to them, which weirdly enough sounds an awful lot like the Midwest. I'll never fully understand. Maybe it has to do with the cold. Maybe the colder it gets, the more likely you are to use the expression can of pop instead of soda. But yeah, like there's not that many accents within New York State itself, yet it was something that occupies the same amount of space as New York State, all of England. The number of accents are staggering. At least 20 come to mind off of the top of your head. It's a wildly entertaining thing. If you ever go to England, do yourself a favor, try and keep track of the accents. Tell you what, you get up north, you get up to a place like Newcastle, where it's this strange mixture of English, but then influenced by the Scandinavian rampaging, pillaging Vikings that came and took over the north of England back in the day, in the areas like York and Scarborough and places like that. But you get up to York, Scarborough, places like Newcastle, and if they don't want you to understand them, they can speak perfect English and you'd have no freaking idea what the hell it was they were saying. It's true. It's fascinating stuff.
Leave the stimulation to the professionals.
Everyone is so smart.
KPRC, more stimulating talk radio.
There's something happening here, and you should know what it is. The dumbing up of America. Now, more AD on the radio.
So, you and I kicked off the show today talking about the royal wedding. Everybody asked me, AD, are you going to stay up late? Is this a big deal for you? Are you watching it live? Did you shed a tear of joy? No, is the answer to all those questions. No, I did not. Well, I did stay up late, but that was to watch reruns of Seinfeld as opposed to the royal wedding. No, not a big deal to me. And everyone was like, but you're English. Surely this is a momentous and important occasion to you. No. But you grew up in England. Well, here's the thing. When you grow up in England, one of the things that you have to do is take an English history class, or several of them. And one of the things that you learn, the chapter in a history book is unavoidable. One of the things you learn about in English history is, well, the British monarchy being stripped of their power during the British Civil War. A guy called Oliver Cromwell and his merry band of Roundheads went to, after long and bloody battles, the monarchy in England and said, hey, this whole thing where you're totalitarian rulers of England, that's over. That's not going to be a thing anymore. We're done with that. You're allowed to stick around, but we are now a democracy. End of story. Now, the part where they were allowed to stick around, I didn't fully understand. And then the part where they were allowed to keep all this property and money that they had amassed over the years for doing absolutely nothing, an amount of money that could have solved the problem of hunger in England, that could probably solve the problem of hunger in the world, just befuddled me. Didn't quite get it. You feel hard done by these people that have paid you no mind for years and years and abused their power and driven you to the point where you're willing to take up arms against them, and then you kind of let them have their stuff. They just don't get to, be the rulers of the country anymore. So you leave them with all the ill-gotten gains and divest them of the burden of responsibility of running a country. I fail to see how this in the long run was a problem for the royal family, and I'm guessing so today, because they're all unbelievably wealthy and have lots of stuff and lots of property. And that always was a question I would ask my dad or my history teacher, like, why do we still have them? What's the point of getting rid of them if you're not really getting rid of them? Why was Oliver Cromwell such a half-stepper in this matter? And I was told different things from, they're a figurehead, to, they make people happy, to, they're just what England is all about. None of which made a tremendous amount of sense to me, but, look, far be it from me to question beyond that when it became achingly clear that nobody approved of my line of questioning as an inquisitive 8th grader. But whatever the hell the case may be, they were always more of a puzzlement than something I admired when I was a kid. I mean, Prince Charles, he's a cool old dude, He he has his Prince's Trust thing. That was nifty. Every year or so, he'll get a whole bunch of enormous rock stars together and they'll jam and raise vast amounts of money for charity. And that's kind of nifty. And, well, you just get that sort of thing happening, and they do some sort of good to the world. They are in some way, shape, or form philanthropic. There's various trusts and various things they do with the British community, but ultimately they don't really contribute a whole hell of a lot, and they're not any closer to giving back what they've got, and they're not any closer really to doing what they could do, and like I said, ending hunger in England, or ending hunger in the world. They have the loot, they have the resources to do it. And the fact that they weren't forced to do it by Oliver Cromwell back in the day, like I said, it was always a bit of a puzzlement to me, strictly from a logistical point of view, not because I was all bent out of shape about the whole thing. So the royal wedding wasn't that big of a deal to me, but I did like the fact, like we were saying earlier, that it was a white guy marrying someone who is not white in a very public way. And look, this should not be a question. This should not be a problem. This should not be something that makes people even bat an eyelid in 2018. This should have been something that went out with Abraham Lincoln. But we still live in a world where there's some folks that are backwards enough to think this is scandalous and shocking and unbelievably progressive. And, well, hey, if a white guy marrying someone who is not white on a public stage in that way makes the idea a little bit more normal, well, that's a good thing. And then, I don't know anything. This is from the outside looking in, and me really paying very little attention to it, but it seems like Meghan and Harry are nice to each other. That's all I noticed. I was like, they seem like they're nice to each other. And again, that might not be the truth, but if the vast majority is picking up on the fact that there's a couple of people treating each other well, and a couple of people, loving each other despite the color of their skin and the obvious differences in their backgrounds, well, that's a really awesome thing. So for that reason, I thought part of the aspect of the royal wedding was surprisingly cool. I was like, oh, right on. And, when we talk about the differences in their backgrounds, nothing could be more jarringly obvious than this. Prince Harry he's Prince Harry of England. Meghan Markle has a relative who, to capitalize on the royal wedding, or in honor of the royal wedding, cultivated a new strain of weed. Yes, royal marijuana, courtesy of one of Meghan Markle's relatives. This is a thing. This happened. Wonder what the Queen makes of it. I don't know, but I think it's kind of interesting and amusing. And, we'll talk exactly about where one can purchase the royal strain of weed a little later on in the show. Right now, though, let's take a look at the events of today and see what's going on in the news. So I don't know if you caught it or not, but all the major networks announced their fall schedules this past week just gone by. Oh, fantastic. Oh, good. And now that's over. Can we all go back to watching Netflix instead? Great. Fantastic. Thanks. Network television, you are not long for this world. Enjoy it while it lasts. Spike Lee. In political news, Spike Lee publicly denounced Donald Trump. Oh, really? Spike Lee publicly denounced Donald Trump. Well, thank goodness, because, I gotta admit, I was beginning to wonder where he stood on this administration. So hard to figure that one out. Peace and denuking talks between the U.S. and North Korea are in danger of being called off. Yeah, we heard about this. It was going to be this momentous occasion where Trump and Lil' Kim sat down, and the differences were going to be hammered out, hopefully without any sort of threats of fire and fury, and talks about how your nuke button was bigger than the other guy's nuke button and actually worked, and it was going to be this whole big thing. And now they're in danger of being called off. I think they might be back on track. We'll have to wait and see. I do know this, though. This is what happens. This is what happens when one country hears Laurel and the other Yanni. Ugh, can open worms everywhere. The folks over at Amazon are going to start giving Prime members a 10% discount at Whole Foods. Oh, that's great. Means before you know it, you're actually going to be able to go into Whole Foods and get a loaf of bread for the shockingly low price of $78. I think I'm still paying off a salad that I had at Whole Foods back in 2010. 10%. Yay. Astronomers have found the fastest growing black hole in space. Yes, astronomers have found the fastest growing black hole in all of outer space. And unless you want to scroll through about 10,000 pages, use Safe Search if you Google fastest growing black hole. That is something you do not want to do at work, unless you're in incognito mode. Do you use incognito mode at work? I do, and I'm afraid I'm going to get popped for it. Not because I'm doing anything untoward with incognito mode, but I got told that if I was going to watch baseball games with the MLB at-bat app, I guess I probably shouldn't. What I should really worry about getting in trouble for is just watching baseball the whole time I'm on the air. But you know what? Let's go Mets. That's what I do. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Certainly not anybody I work with. But here's the thing. I was told by the folks over at MLB when my game kept freezing that if I used the incognito mode on Google Chrome, it would work. It would be less skippy, or whatever phrase you want to pin to it. Yeah, it would be a more pleasurable, non-freezing viewing experience if I was to use incognito mode. And I guess that has something to do with the cookies or something like that. I don't know. I do know this, though. Seems to be working. If you know anything about the science of that, feel free to tweet me at ADSXE. I'd be curious to know why watching baseball games in incognito mode works better than otherwise. I just hope I don't get in trouble for it. It's not like I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm doing this. I'm doing it right in the wide open. But just the fact that I'm using incognito mode makes me feel like I'm doing something sneaky at work when I'm not doing something sneaky at work. Does that make sense? I think I overthink these situations. I don't know. I do know this, though. Got longer legs? Well, apparently, it's not just for women. It makes men more attractive. Yeah, a new study finds that longer legs make men more attractive. Except when those long legs are covered by jorts. Then not so much. Happy birthday to Mr. T. Mr. T is 66 years old. Yes. These days, about the only fools that he pities are the punk kids that are always running across his lawn. Way to go, Mr. T. That's awesome. Way to hang in there. Porn star Brett Rossi also celebrates a birthday today. She's 29 years old. Porn star Brett Rossi turns 29 today. That's the one. Do you remember when Charlie Sheen had the Goddesses? He was living with a couple different porn stars after he quit 2.5 Men, and he was doing like this podcast. Do you remember that thing? He was doing sort of like a live video cast or a podcast where he was going to be spitting truth and only the truth, and it was going to be fascinating, and everybody tuned into it because they're like, whoa, Charlie Sheen's completely unhinged. This is going to be a glorious train wreck. And it actually just worked out to be kind of freaking dull, except for when he would cart on the goddesses that he lived with, the porn stars, one of whom I believe was this porn star Brett Rossi, who is celebrating her 29th birthday today. She almost married Charlie Sheen. keyword almost. In other words, Denise Richards will always carry around the knowledge that she made a worse decision than a porn star when it came to who to marry. Go figure. Congratulations to Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel has announced he will play for the Canadian Football League, yes, the CFL, this season, in the hopes that it will earn him another shot at the NFL, and also because Molson's cheaper up there. So, yeah. He's definitely drinking again. In a welcome home tweet, President Trump misspelled his wife's name as Melanie as opposed to Melania in the tweet. Maybe it auto-corrected to that. But then, if it autocorrects to Melanie, Melania has to ask herself, why is he texting the name Melanie often enough to where his phone picked up on that? Anyways, here's the thing. I don't think it really bothered Melania. In fact, I think she's got her lawyer looking into whether or not it somehow invalidates her marriage. Somehow, I don't think it does. Bill Gates said that President Trump doesn't know the difference between HPV and HIV. Trump could have saved himself the embarrassment if he just asked his wife, Melanie. I don't know what Bill Gates is being so uppity about. He doesn't know the difference between a barber and a bowl. The Russia investigation is now a year old. Yep. Well, that's been a productive year. That's been an excellent use of taxpayer money. Has anything really changed? I'm not necessarily aware that has. I hope it's going somewhere. I hope now they turn up something concrete, because a government investigation, I know one thing, they're not cheap. I know another thing, we're paying for it. So hopefully they get something that they can make stick in some way, shape, or form, and it would have been worth our bazillions of dollars worth of tax. All right, so let's talk about the royal strain of weed, shall we? The wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has inspired a new strain of legal weed. A medical marijuana grower in Oregon named Tyler Dooley has come up with a new strain. It's called Markle Sparkle. And yeah, he's absolutely cashing in on Meghan's name. But you know what? That's okay because he's family. Yeah. Hey, Queen Elizabeth of England, you now have a weed dealer in the family. How do you feel about that? Yeah, Tyler is Meghan's nephew. So what's the scoop on the Markle Sparkle? Well, apparently it smells like blueberries. It helps to relieve pain, anxiety, and insomnia. And according to the website leafbuyer.com, it makes you feel energized, tingly, and euphoric. So, you know, if you're feeling down, out, have pain, anxiety, insomnia, perhaps the royal weed, the Markle Sparkle is for you.